Hey guys, it's that Dividend guy coming at you with another stock opinion video. Today I wanted to cover one of my smallest but one of my favorite positions in my entire portfolio, that being Apple stock. So, guys, I have been a believer in Apple for a very, very long time. I just never saw it at a price that I really wanted to jump in at, and that was my huge hang up with the company. The profitability, I love the product lines, I love the CEO is phenomenal. They're very good at their cash conservation and investing it. Um, there's just so many different branches that I love about this company. First of all, I like the Apple iPhone. I think it is a phenomenally made product. They advertise it super well. People love the new models. They just keep getting more innovative, and I know everybody has their preferences, but I know that there's a lot of customer loyalty to that product. The one glaring issue I see with Apple is the fact that they're so dependent on the iPhone. But what I will say is that I've noticed a big turn in profitability. Like they are still relying on the iPhone, but the big thing that made me want to invest in Apple, and I've wanted to for a while, was actually the services segment of their business, because that's where I think the money's really going to be. I think over time, and I know as of like the past 5 years, services has been growing, but I think that's going to be one of the top big money makers for Apple, is actually that services segment. So I think that's something that's really been overlooked, and not the overarching thing is of course Apple iPhone and just the brand, guys. That's the thing, is once you have an iPhone, it's very hard to switch. It's a very sticky ecosystem, and they know that. And that's one of the reasons why I've wanted to own it for so long, because I have Samsung, but I have reasons for that. So guys, the reason that I don't currently own an iPhone is because I had a friend that passed away during COVID a couple years ago, and the last texts that I got from him were on an old Samsung phone, and so I transferred it over, and I was worried that if I went to an iPhone, I might not get those text messages. So if I had my choice for out without sentimental reasoning, I'd own an iPhone. But overall, guys, the company just rakes in profits. They're super well managed, and the thing is, they have money to pretty much do whatever they want. As well as my favorite investor of all time, Warren Buffett, he was against tech for decades, and then eventually caved and bought Apple. I mean, he owns, I think it's 5% of the company now, so it's his biggest position. In time, I hope that it becomes one of my biggest positions in the portfolio. And guys, just the other thing that I wanted to talk about was the story. I mean, Steve Jobs was such a visionary. I know that there's been a lot of different depictions of him, but I just watched the Jobs movie with Ashton Kutcher. Phenomenal. Probably in my top five movies made of all time. Like, Kutcher just did such a good job. Like, I know Steve Jobs was intense. I mean, he started out in his basement, got capital from an investor, and then built it up into the biggest company in the world. And the thing is, guys, he first of all spent a lot of money on stuff that the board, quote unquote, said was a waste of time, and he pretty much got kicked out for spending too much of their money and building products that the board felt people wouldn't buy, and he sunk money into what they thought were dying projects, and then eventually kicked him out of his own company, voted him off. So they kicked him off his Lisa project because they thought it wasn't making as much money, or wouldn't make as much money as the Apple II. Then they voted him out of his own company. He got kicked out and pretty much barred from coming into Apple. Then they acquired, so after, like, years after he got kicked out, they had a bunch of CEOs that ran the company into the ground essentially, and they needed help. So they sought out Jobs. They bought his company, Next Gen Computers, and used his software to make Apple products better. And eventually, he uh, came back. And the beautiful thing is, the board pretty much got voted out. He got made CEO and finally brought Apple back to prominence, because his vision and his determination for the brand and pushing things forward and always believing in not being satisfied and pushing what could be done is really what Apple was about. I mean, Apple was built on Steve Jobs' vision. Like, Apple was built on Steve Jobs' determination and persistence. Yeah, people thought he was an asshole because of how, like, in the movie, he's a jerk. Like, I mean, he's one of those guys, like, it's really hard to get along with because he's an ass. Like, he just tells people how it is. There's multiple times in the movie, and I've read his memoir and stuff like that as well. People said he was an asshole, right? Like, there's parts in the movie where, like, there is a um there's somebody working for him that he's trying to get, um it was pull down tabs, and he's like, why do we have a word processor that doesn't have any fonts? And the guy goes, which we have a deadline, fonts aren't really our biggest concern. And he goes, if you don't share our vision, you can get the fuck out. And the guy goes, what? He's like, are you firing me? He's like, no, I already fired you. Get the fuck out. And the guy just leaves Apple. He gets fired on the spot. And then he's like, his other employee goes, he was our best programmer. And Steve's response was, or Ashton Kutcher, who's playing Steve Jobs, just goes, he was the best programmer that didn't fucking see our vision. He's like, if anybody else doesn't see the vision, they can get out. And it's like, that was how he saw his company. So when, I mean, I'm sure it was so difficult to be in that situation, but when they started cutting corners and trying to be like IBM, it pissed Steve off because that's not what he wanted to do. He wanted to build a state of the art computer for everyday people. But the problem was, when this was going on, that wasn't a thing. Like, it didn't even register. Like, people couldn't comprehend typing, having a monitor there and seeing it as you're typing it. Like, he created a lot of these different, or sorry, he put together a lot of these concepts that are in, everyday stuff now. But when he was making it, it was terribly hard because people thought he was crazy. And so I recommend anybody who's an Apple fan to watch that movie, because it really does show him going from his basement, starting with little capital, and then building it into the behemoth that is Apple today. And I know we lost him in 2011, but he definitely was a visionary. He worked super hard. He wanted the best pristine product that he could put out, and you have to respect him for it. He's one of the biggest and best innovators in the tech space that's, I think, ever existed. He made a brand that people fell in love with. He made a product, and he made products that people were glued to. And he changed a whole way a generation listened to music. Like, he made the iPod. That's actually how the movie starts. Is he pulls out, he said it's 1,000 songs in your pocket, and he pulls it out and shows the iPod. So he was just such an innovator. And I know from the some of the earnings calls that I've listened to, and a lot of the Tim Cook interviews that I've watched, which is the CEO of Apple, should say down here, yep, Tim Cook is the CEO. A lot of that, he talks about Jobs and says, Apple's whole, pretty much image and mantra is what Steve Jobs was. That's what he wants Apple to continue to be, because that's the brand and what people come to expect from Apple and have fallen in love with the company. He wants that to live on. So he wants Steve to live through the products and the innovation that they're doing today, which I think is just beautiful. So currently it's a really small position for me, but it's one of the positions that I've always had on my radar. I've always loved the company, and I want to own it pretty much forever. Like, I pick on my parents honestly for not buying it, which my parents would have been, when Apple went public, it was like 74. So my mom was like 1 or 2. My dad would have been 2. So obviously they couldn't have invested, but to me, this is like the same. This runs parallel for me, like Warren Buffett. When he was a kid, he went through his grandpa's grocery store and counted bottle caps to see which product of soda was the most popular, and it was like a 3-to-1 for Coca-Cola. Like there was 3 bottle caps for Coke for every Fanta or Dr. Pepper or Pepsi or whatever. So obviously Coca-Cola was the winner, but it took him decades to buy Coca-Cola. And so I think that's the same. Like I had the first iPod Shuffle. I think that was like 2010, and of course I was born in 95, so I wasn't old enough to invest obviously back then. But when 2014 hit, one of the first companies that I should have owned, I drink Coca Cola every day. And at that point, I had an Apple iPod, I had an iPod Touch, I have a MacBook that I upload all my videos on, and I've made music on it. So I'm very familiar with the Apple ecosystem, and it was just one of those things that I saw it at that price at 132, and I'm like, it was like a da 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 ding, I had avoided it because of the price tag for so long, and I'm like, you know what? I pick on my parents all the time for for not investing. I'm like, a single share at 132 is better than no shares at all. So I do want Apple to be one of the biggest positions in my portfolio, and it's one of the stocks that I'm happy to own, and I plan on owning for the rest of my life. But I want to know how you guys feel about Apple. Have you had bad experiences? Maybe you switched to Samsung, or maybe you have a Google Pixel. The biggest thing for me is I like to see the fact that they're getting away from just being a singular product, and they're more than just an iPhone. I'm investing in it because I believe in the company long term. I love the past, I love the present, and I think the future is going to be super profitable for them as well. But the thing that I'm the most excited about is that services segment growing. And Apple TV, I think, has some decent growth built into it as well. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with that cash pile. Um, so I'm in the Buffett corner when it comes to Apple. I want it to be eventually, if I were to pick my top 3 investments, Apple's going to be number 1, Coca-Cola is going to be number 2, and to be honest with you, Realty Income is probably going to be number 3. Now it'll take for dividend income wise, like how I want the income to be distributed, but it'll take a while because I have $15,000 and a couple or $10,000+ in multiple positions. So it will take a while for Apple to be that big. But given how much I like the company, I'm excited to own it, and I do want it to be one of the bigger positions. But guys, let me know how you feel about Apple down in the comments below. Is it one of your favorites? Do you think it's overhyped? Would you never touch it with a 10-foot pole? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I do recommend that Jobs movie with Ashton Kutcher. It's super good, so if you haven't seen it, obviously check it out because it's definitely worth a watch. But with that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next Stock Opinion video. Take care.